Don't you own a mirror? Take a look at yourself before stepping in here." The voice echoed across the marble hall of Royal Range, a place where everything from the glint of crystal chandeliers overhead to the vintage whiskey glasses clutched by its members reeked of upper-class arrogance. All eyes turned toward the woman standing by the entrance, the one they believed had stumbled into their world by mistake. She wore a faded nurse's uniform, worn-out sneakers, her hair neatly tied back, and not a single piece of jewelry except for a cheap digital watch. In her hand was a small stack of flattened cash, worn $20 bills, just enough to cover the range fee if the receptionist were a little less condescending. Her name was Celia Hartley, and all she wanted was a quiet afternoon to practice shooting, not to show off, not to compete, just to maintain the survival instinct she'd clung to all these years. But the moment she walked into Royal Range, dubbed the holy ground of firearms for the elite, she wasn't treated like a customer. She was a joke. Damian Sterling, the man who ran the place, adjusted the collar of his tactical vest while eyeing her as if scanning a clearance bin item at a luxury supermarket. "You're in the wrong place, nurse. This place isn't for people like you. It's for those who've actually seen combat, who know what life and death pressure really means, not a few vaccines and some gauze swaps." Laughter rippled from the reception desk, from the VIP group at the bar, even from the attendant polishing a rifle priced like a luxury sports car. A man in a grey suit guffawed. "Maybe she's filming a documentary from ER to firing range, the misguided journey of a nurse." Celia didn't respond. She simply placed the cash on the cold stone counter and stared directly into Sterling's eyes, her gaze unwavering. But what truly unsettled the room wasn't her lack of wealth, it was her calm, as if no one here was worth fearing. What no one knew was that the woman they just tried to throw out once had her name etched in special operations files. She used to go by the codename Ghost Hawk, once lay prone on sun-baked rooftops in Kandahar, peering through a high-powered scope, waiting for the wind to settle before saving an entire platoon with a single shot. She left the battlefield for the only reason that could make her lower her weapon, to be with her mother during her final months. Since then, Celia had chosen silence, chosen an ordinary life, chosen to save lives with syringes instead of a rifle. But today, someone may have just pushed that final boundary of her patience. Celia drove away from Royal Range in silence, no music, no air conditioning, just letting the late afternoon wind slip through the cracked window to soothe the burn that hadn't yet reached her skin, but was already smoldering deep inside. She wasn't angry about the insults. She'd faced real snipers in Fallujah, men who didn't mock with words, but with steel-piercing bullets. What choked her was the look Damian Sterling had given her. That look she'd spent a lifetime trying to forget, the gaze of the privileged who see others as trash, as lesser beings, as if everything she'd endured was worthless now that she no longer wore a uniform. Her old Civic stopped in front of a 3-story walk-up with no elevator. She climbed the creaking wooden stairs she knew by heart, brushing her hand along the wall as if to find some anchor in something unchanged. Her apartment was as modest as her life. A tiny kitchen, a dim yellow light, a nearly empty fridge, just a carton of milk near expiry, a few leftover meals from her last shift, and a small tub of vanilla ice cream she kept for what she called the really bad days. Today was one of them. She sat on her worn-cornered sofa, didn't turn on the TV, just reached for the tin box on her bookshelf, a box she hadn't touched in years. Inside was another world, a scratched-up medal, a 2009 Delta Team photo with the words "To Hawk, our shadow in the sun," a slightly rusted steel name tag, and the desert scarf she'd wrapped around her neck through 3 campaigns. At the very bottom was a picture of her mother, the woman in a headscarf, smiling gently at Celia's nursing school graduation, even though she was in the final stage of chemotherapy then. Celia touched the name tag, her mind flooding with questions she'd never dared speak aloud. Had she made the right choice, leaving the battlefield, by trading her rifle for a syringe? Had she betrayed herself? Or was that the bravest choice of all, to give up glory for healing, not for victory? The phone rang, cutting through her thoughts. A message from Sarah, her colleague at St. Mary's Memorial Hospital. "I saw you looked a bit tired during your shift today. Let's grab coffee tomorrow morning." "My treat," Celia smiled, replied, "Absolutely," and set the phone down. But as the screen went dark, reflecting her face in the dim light, she no longer saw a regular nurse. She saw Ghost Hawk, the woman who had done what others couldn't, who had pulled the trigger when no one else dared to. Maybe it was time for them to find out who they had really just laughed at. And if the past refused to stay buried, then perhaps she would be the one to wake it. The next morning began like any other. Celia put on her white coat, tied her hair neatly, and stepped into her shift at St. Mary's Memorial, a place where a single glance could tell you whether a patient was about to stop breathing. But from the first break of the day, everything started to shift. Messages poured in. Her phone wouldn't stop vibrating. She had just sat down in the break room with a coffee she hadn't even sipped yet, when Sarah rushed in, eyes wide with both concern and radiant disbelief. "Celia, you have to see this," she said, thrusting her phone in front of her friend. And then Celia saw it, the video. Surveillance footage from Royal Range, sharp enough to catch every disdainful glance. There she was in her nurse's scrubs, placing her money on the counter, facing off with Sterling. He laughed, mocked her, and pushed the money off the counter to the floor. The crowd watched as if enjoying a cruel comedy, and finally, the moment he touched her shoulder with 2 fingers, like brushing off dirt, before calling security to have her removed from the building. The video had been clipped and captioned, "Nurse shamed for being poor." Then the nation discovers she's a military legend. She's Ghost Hawk. And they just kicked out the wrong person. Within hours, the post had over 50,000 shares. By the end of the day, nearly 200,000. People weren't just outraged. They investigated, tracked down military records, found an old Delta team photo. They matched the face in the video with the woman in the weathered camo, and the internet exploded with one conclusion: Celia Hartley is Ghost Hawk, the legend who saved 12 lives from a car bomb in Kandahar with a single shot. Comments flooded in like a dam bursting. "I served in a unit near hers. No mistake, that level of composure under humiliation, that's Ghost Hawk. Watch how she didn't react when insulted. That's not weakness. That's military discipline. Who the hell is Sterling to speak down to her?" Celia continued her shift, like nothing had changed. She dressed wounds, administered meds, and called patients' families. But down every hallway she walked, someone stared. Not with pity, but with awe, with respect, with disbelief that the woman who had quietly placed a stethoscope on their chest was the same one who had etched her name into history with a single bullet. That afternoon, a new message arrived. Not from a colleague, not from a journalist, but from a name she hadn't seen in over a decade: Marcus Wheeler, her former spotter, and the only person alive who knew everything she had done during the war. The message was short: "Saw the video. Still, you still choosing silence. But this time, I think it's time the world knows who they're really dealing with." And a few hours later, as Celia finished her shift and descended into the parking garage, a familiar voice echoed through the shadows. A voice that once whispered wind speeds, enemy flanks, and life-or-death updates into her earpiece in the middle of sandstorms. "Still hate bullies, don't you, Hawk?" She turned. Marcus stood there, older, grayer, but his eyes still the same, unshaken, unjudging, holding only silent loyalty and a question he hadn't yet asked out loud. This time, will you rise? And beneath the flickering yellow light of the garage, she nodded softly, but with the certainty of someone who had once pulled a trigger from a mile out in a sandstorm. Because if the past was coming back, then this time she would meet it head-on. Not as a nurse, not as the woman was shoved out of a lobby, but as Ghost Hawk. While the internet roared headlines from media outlets flared across screens, Nurse once, a legendary special operative, humiliated at the elite gun club. She said nothing, but the entire nation spoke for her. At Royal Range, however, Damian Sterling wasn't afraid. On the contrary, he fed on the attention like a shark scenting blood. He went live on the official page, wearing a smug grin, standing in front of a sparkling Royal Range backdrop. This time his tactical vest was even more elaborate, like he was about to lead a raid on the Capitol. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not here to apologize. Because I have nothing to apologize for. Royal Range is not a playground for the weak. It's not a stage for so-called folk legends to act out their feelings. Then he smiled and paused at the perfect beat, locking eyes with the camera. But if someone out there truly thinks they're that good, I've got an offer: the Elite Marksman Challenge, a long-distance shooting competition broadcast live. The winner takes $100,000 and the title of Weapons Master. Location: right here at Royal Range. The rules simple: whoever shoots better wins. And if that nurse thinks she has what it takes, I invite her to sign up. The internet exploded. The hashtag #GhostHawkReturns flooded every platform. Some believed Celia should walk away, that she had nothing to prove. But the majority couldn't wait. They wanted to see the woman who had been mocked rise up and make the whole system bow. That evening, Celia returned to her apartment. Marcus was already there, seated in the worn armchair, his laptop open and filled with intelligence files only ex-Special Ops could access. He's betting his reputation to save face. But you're holding the truth for thousands who've been dismissed just for not looking the part. Celia sat down, her eyes steady now. The prize doesn't matter. But if I step up and win, I won't just reclaim my own dignity. I'll reclaim a place for every person being laughed at simply because they weren't born into privilege. Marcus smiled. Then we'll play by his rules and win by yours. The next day, Celia walked into Royal Range. No one stopped her. No one dared. She walked straight to the registration table and left behind a single slip of paper, her real name underlined with a firm, unflinching stroke: Celia Hartley, contestant number 47, codename Ghost Hawk. As the media exploded with the name Ghost Hawk, Sterling kept flashing his smug grin on national television. He flaunted his guns, his SWAT team even boasted about a guest trainer flown in from a foreign special forces unit, all of it live-streamed inside a shooting range, drenched in LED lights and blaring electronic music. What he didn't know was that across the city, in a forgotten, rundown range behind an old car wash, Celia was stepping into a place she once vowed never to revisit. The range was overgrown, with weeds crawling up crumbling walls, cardboard targets flapping in the wind, and not a single camera in sight. But it was here the legend woke. There were no coaches, no glossy uniforms, just an old Remington 700, the same desert scarf she'd wrapped around her neck in 2008, and the sound of wind slicing past her ears, like the battlefield itself, whispering each breath back into memory. Marcus came every night after work. He didn't say much, just took notes, handed her rounds, adjusted angles. Some nights, The rain turned the ground to mud, the air blurred with haze. Celia still shot. No wind gauge, no ballistic computer. Everything in her seemed pre-programmed. "You still calculate like you used to?" Marcus muttered after she pierced through 2 consecutive targets with a single round. "Not with your eyes, but with that sixth sense only those who've stood between life and death ever develop." Celia wiped down her rifle, said nothing. There was no fire in her anymore, only precision, silence, and a terrifying persistence. Meanwhile, Sterling began to feel the tremors. Sponsors started calling, "Is she really Ghost Hawk?" She saved an entire unit with a single bullet. Is that true? If she wins, how exactly do you plan to explain this to the shareholders? Sterling laughed it off, reassuring them with his go-to line. "She's just a nurse who used to hold a rifle. My team, these are real marksmen." But then one day, he received a leaked video. Celia was practicing at the old range. Filmed from a distance, the footage was grainy, but the shot was unmistakable. 1 bullet through 3 targets, landing dead center on the final one. No captions, no dialogue, just one line at the end. "Silence is a form of aim, and I've been lining up long enough." The next morning, Sterling arrived at the range earlier than usual. He said nothing. No live stream, and for a brief moment, he stared at the rifle on the table in silence. For the first time in his life, the hand that once displayed weapons like jewelry trembled just a little. That morning, Royal Range felt more like a military entertainment cathedral. Media crews set up early banners reading "Elite Marksman Challenge" hung everywhere, and guests sipped artisan coffee while debating whether the nurse would even dare to show up. Sterling arrived in a brand new tactical vest, a gleaming gold-plated Desert Eagle strapped to his hip like jewelry. He addressed the crowd with a voice perfectly rehearsed. "We're here to honor real skill, not internet legends." The organizers announced the rules. Each contestant would have 10 bullets to fire at 10 targets ranging from 100 to 1,000 yards, with constantly shifting programmed wind conditions to simulate a real battlefield. Petrov, Sterling's top shooter, stepped up first. Electronic wind gauge laser scope tactical headset. He hit 9 out of 10. The crowd erupted in applause. Sterling gripped the mic and smiled confidently. "Someone will need a perfect score to win. But I don't think that's possible." Then Celia appeared. No cap, no tactical gear, no digital instruments. Just a weathered Remington with chipped paint, a pair of worn gloves, and a look in her eyes, as if she had already seen how it would end. She approached the gun check table, presenting a nameless, label-less, colorless rifle, marked only by a tiny scratch near the trigger and one engraved line. "One is enough," the audience whispered. Cameras zoomed in on her bare, unflinching face. Sterling leaned toward an assistant and murmured, "This will be her final embarrassment." But Celia said nothing. She didn't need to. She stepped to the line, sat, aimed. Then suddenly, she ejected 9 rounds from the chamber, letting them fall one by one to the concrete floor. The sound of metal clinking echoed like sirens across the range. The entire arena fell silent. Sterling narrowed his eyes. You're only using 1 round." Celia didn't answer. She just waited. As the targets began to move, simulated wind howled from the left, shifting every 3 seconds. Everyone assumed she was frozen under pressure, but she was waiting for the moment. And then it came. In a window lasting less than 3 seconds, all 10 targets aligned into a perfect diagonal line, a condition only those who had survived real war zones would recognize in an instant. Celia squeezed the trigger. Pang! The bullet struck the first target, pierced through, then continued its path guided by flawless calculations of wind drift angular offset and linear velocity decay. 1, 2, 3, all the way to the 10th. 10 targets all shook simultaneously, each pierced dead center through the heart. Silence. Then, the range erupted with a sound never before heard in that place. Applause. Shouts. Her name is being chanted. Ghost Hawk. Ghost Hawk. Ghost Hawk. Sterling stood frozen, lips trembling, unable to speak. Cameras caught his pale face, then panned to hers, calm, resolute, unbreakable. The same woman he had once kicked out of this very range. Celia rose, turned to face the crowd. Her voice wasn't loud, but every word carved through the air. I didn't need 10 rounds. I only needed one, just like all those times I didn't have the luxury of missing because someone's life was waiting on it. She looked Sterling dead in the eye. You said this place was only for those who've seen real combat. Well, now you've met one. The moment the loudspeaker rang out, confirming 10 targets, 1 bullet, an unprecedented record, the proud stage known as Royal Range collapsed figuratively and almost literally, not from the impact of a bullet, but from the weight of conscience, carried by millions of viewers watching through television screens, social media streams, and real-time headlines updating by the second. Celia walked off the shooting line. She didn't raise her rifle. She didn't smile triumphantly. She didn't need applause. She simply turned her back quietly, but each step she took seemed to crack further. The brittle facade Sterling had built out of ego and entitlement. Sterling tried to hold his composure. He grabbed the mic, his voice shaking, forcing out a desperate line. She cheated, used theatrical effects, but no one listened anymore. A senior investor stood up from the auditorium, signaling security and speaking coldly into a handheld mic. We, the Royal Range Board of Directors, hereby suspend all operational authority of Mr. Damian Sterling until an emergency review is convened. Then a second voice rose. We cannot continue our association with a man who publicly humiliated a national military hero, then lost to her in disgrace on live television. The room fell into total silence. Sterling was escorted off the stage under the cold stares of hundreds. As he was pushed through the side exit, his eyes caught one last image. His gold-plated pistol, once paraded for show, now left abandoned on a table. No one even bothered to pick it up. 3 hours later, his name vanished from the Royal Range website. 12 hours after that, Royal Range rebranded itself Liberty Range on the recommendation of a newly formed special counsel established overnight. 3 days later, Celia Hartley accepted an invitation to serve as a special advisor to a new community training initiative open to all backgrounds, all genders, all walks of life, as long as they came with respect and a willingness to grow. And within a week, the video of her historic shot surpassed 100 million views. News outlets called it the bullet that silenced prejudice. One person, one bullet, one system, forced to change. That evening, Celia returned to her small apartment. Her Remington had been cleaned and rested on its shelf beside a photo frame, an old picture of her with her Delta team from years ago. Marcus sent her a brief message. I saw them cry, watching your shot. But it wasn't because of the shot. It was because of how you made them see themselves. She smiled, but said nothing. She didn't need to, because for the first time in years, she knew she hadn't just hit a target. She'd broken through the doors that had always been slammed shut to people like her. 1 year after Royal Range was erased, Liberty Range had become a new symbol of fairness, not because of the weapons inside, but because of how people were treated when they walked through the doors. On the opening day of a new training program, Celia didn't take the stage. She sat quietly in the back row, watching young nurses, aging veterans and teens from rough neighborhoods, one by one, stepping up to the shooting stand, hands trembling but eyes full of resolve. In another corner stood Viktor Petrov, the same man who once mocked her, now the head instructor. He no longer showed off. No gold-plated gear, no flashy outfits, just a simple name tag. Viktor, instructor, student of Toch. Celia's sessions were always full. Students had to register 3 months in advance. But they didn't come just to learn how to shoot. They came to learn how to stay calm in chaos, how to rise when underestimated, how to let the truth echo without ever raising their voice. She taught them one core principle. A bullet's power doesn't come from what it destroys. It comes from being the right choice at the right moment from the right person. On the main wall of Liberty Range, a bronze plaque reads, "Excellence has no dress code," in honor of Toch. Outside, the world had begun to change. Other ranges launched community outreach programs. Military academies added Celia's story to their curriculum under combat psychology and integrity. A young girl in Afghanistan who once wrote to Celia saying she was shunned in her unit for being female had now broken the regional military's long-distance shooting record. In a letter she sent back, she wrote, "I used to think I wasn't good enough until I saw you shoot. Not just because you hit the target, but because you didn't need to say a word to make the world stop and listen." And Sterling. The last anyone saw of him, he was in an online ad, trying to sell a used SUV at a dealership in Texas. No badges, no titles, no one called his name anymore. Because arrogance may build a reputation fast, but it can be erased in a single moment of truth. That night Celia returned home and placed her Remington back on its shelf. She didn't need it to prove anything anymore. Next to it sat a photo of her mother, the woman who once told her, "You won't always need to fight, but if you must, let your silence be the loudest thing in the room." Celia sat down, opened her journal, and wrote a single line. "They laughed when I walked in. Now they hold the door open for thousands like me to follow." What you've just witnessed isn't merely a story about a historic shot. It's the silent, powerful journey of a woman once dismissed for her modest appearance and humble profession. Celia Hartley, a nurse cast out from a place meant for the elite, proved that true worth isn't defined by the uniform you wear or the car you drive, but by the heart you hold steady in the storm and the truth you refuse to abandon. The lesson here is clear. Sometimes you don't need to shout to be heard. You just need to rise, do what's right, and let your precision, your kindness, and your silence speak louder than words. My belief, if anyone has ever told you that you're not good enough, not worthy enough, remember this: it's often those who are underestimated that go on to do the unimaginable. So don't underestimate yourself. Don't fear exclusion, and never let anyone else define your value. If this story moved, you leave a comment below. I won't stay silent anymore. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Toch Story, where ordinary stories are told with extraordinary emotion, and where every video is a reminder that sometimes just one person, one bullet can change the entire world.